What's good, Pistons fans? Welcome back to the channel. On today's episode of Pistons Jack Chats, we had NBA draft analyst and expert Hoop Intellect. We spoke about who the Pistons could be looking at pick 37, some potential trade up candidate, and we also took a look at the Pistons' current young core. Plenty of great discussion with KeAndre. Thank you to him for joining us, and I think you're really going to enjoy this. So let's get to it. Welcome back to Pistons Jack Chats, where I'll have a guest from the Pistons and NBA community join me to discuss your Detroit Pistons each and every week. Before we get started, if you haven't already, I'd be super grateful if you could like, subscribe, drop a comment below. That just helps keep the channel growing. But let's get to it. Today we have a very special guest joining the show, my go-to for all things NBA draft at this time of the year, KeAndre, aka Hoop Intellect. What's going on, my man?
Nothing much, it's a busy time of year. I appreciate you, having me on the show.
For sure, man. And I was just quickly saying to you, though, I've been following your stuff. I'm sure everyone watching this on YouTube knows who you are and your channel over at Hoop Intellect. But yeah, you've been my go-to. My Pistons have been in the lottery for past 5-6 years. So you've been a big part of my life come this time of the year. So it's really cool to have you on the show, man. But the first thing I wanted to ask you was, like I said, I came across you in 2020. But what inspired you to start Hoop Intellect, and like, where does your love or passion for the NBA draft and scouting come from?
Yeah, so at the time I kind of was just experimenting, like trying to figure out what I wanted to do in terms of like making content, and I found that it was like I mostly wanted to focus on basketball. So I was kind of making highlight videos and working on my editing skills and those types of things at the time. So like did Alex Caruso highlight video, some other like more unheralded players that maybe a Bleacher Report or somebody else wouldn't have made at the time. And then 2020 comes around, and I was doing some writing at the time about the draft, and I just decided to merge those two things at once. And I wasn't the best editor at the time, but like the pieces started to come together a little bit more. I also didn't have a laptop or anything, so I had to keep going to the library every time to make those initial videos. Yeah. So like the Tyrese Halliburton, James Wiseman, a lot of those videos were done like in pieces. So I would make part of it. The computers in the library didn't save, so I would have to come back, download the stuff off Google Drive again, and then edit again. But I was doing all of that stuff, and I started to get a little bit more traction than I was on some of the other stuff that I was creating at the time. So I just kept going at it, and then from there just continued to learn from different people and grow in the scouting world, and just really hone in on getting better as a scout, as an overall content creator, communicator, those types of things. But yeah, I think just in terms of the NBA draft, that was just kind of the lane that I entered in. I think basketball in general is like the thing that I'm most interested in, and it just kind of that happened to be my role and my spot to play within the community, which I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to do. So yeah.
It's so cool to hear that, because yeah, I remember, like I said, 2020 coming across those early videos, and I think the thing that stood out to me with your content was you would have all these like really intriguing stats that I don't know if they're from Synergy or wherever, but it was really detailed, and I almost feel like you were one of the first maybe to start doing that on YouTube. Maybe not, but just for me here in Australia, it was like, wow, this is so in depth. I don't think you actually used to do like a voiceover on those initial ones, but I just remember thinking like, this is awesome. You had all these clips, because here in Australia, and I'm sure a lot of people internationally, like college basketball and any of the draft stuff, especially like only even like 5 years ago, wasn't as accessible as it might have been in the US. So, man, that's really cool to hear, man. I didn't know you were doing all that stuff in the library. Like that's crazy.
Yeah. I actually had forgot that I wasn't even doing voiceovers on those first couple. I think here and there I would come in and talk, and like maybe I'd do an outro or something like that if I can remember correctly. But then like as I got a mic and everything, and I was able to get a laptop, then it started to evolve a little bit more over time. So yeah.
No, it's super cool to hear, man. Well, I'm going to ask you a few more questions later about hoop intellect and that kind of thing, but everyone's here for your draft knowledge, your expertise, particularly on the 2025 draft class. I just recently watched your big board, which I think you dropped maybe 3 to 5 days ago. So everyone should definitely go check that out. I'm going to put my hand up. Second round, I'm not that across it, so I'm going to rely on yourself. That's why I brought you on. Who are your 5 players around the mark of pick 37 that you could see fitting in nicely with the Pistons, with their current roster?
Yeah, so I think the Pistons are in a pretty interesting spot now. Like you kind of have at least an idea of what success looks like, being able to get to the playoffs, be competitive with a team like the Knicks, and find a formula that works even through not making a ton of changes to the roster. Obviously, you add Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway, those guys, Tobias Harris. It makes a world of a difference just in terms of spacing the floor. So for me, I think just continuing to go in that direction in terms of bringing shooting, defense, and maybe a little bit more size in the front court. So I think you could go in a variety of directions with that. The first guy I would put in that sort of range at 37 is kind of a little bit difficult to predict who is exactly going to end up being there. But I would say somebody like Janai Broome from Auburn. He may not have the most textbook NBA, gifts in terms of length and athleticism, but his production over his career at Auburn, his ability to, affect the game in multiple ways, his positioning on defense, and just kind of be that backup 4 or 5 guy who can come in, potentially space the floor, make plays in a variety of ways. I think he would make a lot of sense for them as a rotation piece and somebody who could, complement the likes of Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey and all the other guys, Ausar Thompson, in the future. Some other guys I think would also make some sense would be Chaz Lanier and Kobe Brea as just straight up shooters. Lanier is a little bit more talented in the creation department for himself, a little bit more physical, I would say, as well. But Kobe Brea has had a heck of a career starting at Dayton, shooting over 40% off the catch and off the dribble. Just somebody who you can tell is going to shoot it at a high clip. He may have to work on some other things in terms of passing, creation, those types of things. But you put him in a situation like this, being able to play off of the creators there, and I think that he's going to have a lot of success in the NBA just because he has an elite skill and has the opportunity to play as a role player. I would also put Tyrese Proctor in this mix as well. I know, the Pistons have gotten guards recently in recent drafts, but I think what Proctor brings as a bigger guard who can, he's shown that he can play a variety of roles. He did that at Duke. He started out as more of a creator, somebody who was playing more of a pure point guard role and evolved into a 40% three-point shooter on a Final Four team, somebody who defends, can make those connected plays. I think he makes a lot of sense for most teams, especially in that early second round range, but especially this Pistons one, who I think can still use, some juice in the creation department because, Cade had a lot of responsibility this year. And then I'd also throw somebody like Alex Tui in that mix as well, as a guy who, I'm sure you're familiar with, playing in the NBL, being from Australia, somebody who's just like a Swiss Army knife in a lot of ways. Improved as a shooter this year, can slide his feet, has gotten better on that end of the floor as well. Big time shot creation moments as well over these last couple years. I'm just kind of evolving, but I think that he fits in a lot of different spaces, played well at the combine. He'd be another guy who I would throw in that mix as well.
No, I love all those names, and I know Broome and Lanier are 2 guys that I'm pretty sure I've actually already worked out with the Pistons. And I was going to ask you about the Australians because the other one there not mentioned, who I don't think made your top 60, was Rocco, but I'll ask about him later. I want to focus on Proctor and Tui just first. Tui's an interesting one. So the year I worked at the NBL was his first season.
Mhm.
And I think he started a lot of games for Sydney off the top of my head, but he was a huge improver of all that next star crop in the past season. And I think like he's kind of a guy, I think you described in one of your videos, like he doesn't have necessarily a standout skill, but it's 6'8", decent athleticism, probably just slightly above average. And he's pretty strong. Like he's a guy who, I mean, wings that have shooting potential are going to be valuable anywhere. So he's definitely a player I would like to see the Pistons pick up. And then Tyrese Proctor, I remember, so you'll know more about this maybe. I remember watching him when he was playing in the NBL 1. This maybe was in 2021, 2022. He's playing for like this, I can't remember what it's called, but they play in our NBL 1 division here. And I feel like, was he meant to initially be like a lottery pick? And that probably was when like he was seen as more as that on-ball guy. But could you just talk to me a little bit about like him maybe on the defensive side of the ball and maybe his shot, if that's developed at all in his, I think is he 3 seasons at Duke?
Yeah, he played 3 seasons at Duke. And initially, yeah, the pitch for him was kind of more on the creation side and being able to, set the table, get stuff for himself as well. And he had like lottery potential as a guy who I believe went to college a year earlier ahead of schedule than he was initially supposed to play with Derek Lively and those guys out at Duke. But yeah, I think, for him, he had at least some significant late first round, early second round buzz that freshman year going one and done, especially how he finished that season. Had a pretty rocky start to that year, but he finished really strong. And I think, for him, it was just more about becoming more consistent and finding a spot that makes a lot of sense for him. And the shot was a big part of that, being able to knock down threes at a higher clip, shooting around 40%. And defensively, I like him quite a bit. I think that he has the potential to be at least above average in the NBA as we saw him start to lean into that more. He was, a positive piece at the point of attack, somebody who understands team defense principles, played on some really good defensive teams over his career, and was never a weak link, has good size to be able to guard, a few wings, but, stay more in the backcourt. But yeah, I think that he just checks a lot of boxes. And even though like there were some games where you would still ask, where is he at in terms of like being able to, go get his own, or, he had certain times where he didn't show up in the biggest moments. But I still think you look at him as a young player who has a lot of tools and somebody that can contribute.
Yeah, no, I really like the idea of him being more of that off-ball guard that you could put alongside JI or Cade, especially if the jumper continues to grow and improve. Because is he around 6'5", 6'6", or maybe something like that? Definitely in shoes, I feel. So that's something you definitely need alongside Ivey. And look, what I'm talking about Proctor as long-term being a rotational piece, like not a starter. This is not for you, it's for Pistons fans watching this. But I think that could be, one of the needs they probably need more long-term is that backup point guard or just backup combo guard. They have Marcus Sasser, but he's more definitely shot first and a little bit undersized, even though I like Sass. So those are 2 names in the Australians I'm very interested in. I just want to get your quick thoughts on Rocco Zikarsky. This isn't really Pistons related, but for fans watching, Pistons do need some size. I'm going to ask about some other prospects in a minute, but Rocco is 7'3". His first season as well, I was at the NBL, and he was, very high hopes. He was okay in his first season, but he was only 17. Then last season, it just didn't really work out. But I will say Brisbane, the team he was on, was in a weird position because their coach really needed to make the finals or his job was on the line. So playing an 18-year-old big didn't necessarily fit, but Rocco also didn't show a lot. But what were your thoughts on him overall as a prospect? Because I know before the season, he was still highly touted, I believe, before the cycle started.
Yeah, I was pretty high on him coming into the season, like you kind of mentioned, how he played as a 17-year-old in the NBL. Just his ability to protect the rim, finish plays, do a little bit in terms of playmaking and operating as a hub. And also, obviously, at that size, he's not moving like Evan Mobley or Bam Adebayo, but relatively speaking, he moves pretty well, given he is 7'3" barefoot. So I think coming into the season, there was a lot of hope there. he has some injuries that kind of worried me. And like you mentioned, he wasn't able to produce as consistently, and things just didn't come together all the way. And I guess he still has the opportunity to not be in this draft if for a few more days, or I guess about a week or so. But I still think like I believe he was on my last big board. He was in the top 60, I think. If I didn't make a mistake or something. But the pitch for him is still there. Like, he's a young guy who, as long as the health checks out, he's going to have an opportunity to, have a role and come in and contribute in that way. And I think for the Pistons, maybe not at 37, at least for me, I think there'd be other options there. But if you buy a pick in the second and he's still available, or for some reason, he goes undrafted or something, I think he'd be perfect as a long-term play, somebody who you can kind of bring along and potentially have as a backup five, or somebody who can come in and play minutes and contribute there. So I definitely still think that he has a shot at contributing. Again, like, you can't teach being 7'4" with shoes on and his movement and solid touch and those types of things. And we saw him operate at a high level, go toe to toe with somebody like Ausar in his minutes in that first NBL season. So I still think he's got a clear opportunity.
Yeah, it's really, I find him so intriguing because for us here in Australia, he was this huge hope for us. Like, our national team's actually, like, we're happy with where it is, but Rocco was like, we've had like Bogut, Baines, just some centers in the past. So just to see him kind of slide this season was interesting. But kind of moving on here a little bit to some more hypothetical stuff, but I still think it relates to our Pistons. Let's say the Pistons front office, they want to, Brooklyn, for example, have 3 first-round picks at 19, 26, and 27, which who knows what they do with them. But let's just say the Pistons traded for one of those ones at 26 or 27. A guy I've seen a lot of Pistons fans talking about is Maxime. Is it Maxime Renault out of Stanford? 7'1" center. I'll let you talk to his game a little bit more. But on top of him, is there anyone else you could see in that range if the Pistons were to move up 10 spots that could fit some of the needs we spoke about in, like, a true 7-footer, some shooting in the front court, some of the other needs?
Yeah, I think, just starting with Renault, I think he checks a lot of those boxes. And he was somebody who I initially thought might end up being there at 37. And then after everybody had gone back to college and he starts to, rise, and his stock rises more into like the 20s range, or maybe even higher than that, that starts to become a little bit more out of reach. But as a potential trade-up candidate, he is a 7-footer who can space the floor, score on the interior. He may not be the most defensive-leaning guy as a rim protector, or somebody who's just going to, dominate possessions on that end. But I do think he moves well enough. He's at least improved there over his career to, survive in the NBA. But I think that he's at least somebody who, with his size and shooting ability, and ability to attack closeouts, make a play from there, like, he's somebody who a lot of teams are going to be interested in and could come in and contribute, at least as a third big, and somebody who can change pace and open up the floor for a lot of people. And specifically for this Pistons team, I think you get really interesting with the lineups. Maybe you play, year 2 Ron Holland, you got Ausar out there with Cade. Like, you could get really interesting if you have that legitimate floor spacer and somebody who, can kind of open things up. And especially when you're talking about running a pick and roll with Cade and attracting attention there, so he's not seeing 2 to the ball as easily, somebody who can, change the dimensions of the floor in that way. I think he's somebody who, checks a lot of those boxes that you would want. Again, like, it starts to become interesting. You might actually have to trade up to, 19 to be sure that you could, potentially get him or something like that. But he's somebody who I think the Pistons will be, high on in that area. But somebody else I would say, in that mix is Drake Powell from UNC. He's a freshman wing, didn't have the best offensive season, kind of looked a little tentative at times, but his skill set as a 3-and-D guy, one of the better wing defenders in the class, somebody who can, knock down a shot at the least. I think that he would fit in pretty well here. He kind of matches a lot of what you've seen from Ausar and Ron Holland, at least defensively, but, he's a little bit further along as a shooter. So I think that he could get in that mix as well. as a potential trade-up candidate in that late first round area. And then I would also throw Ryan Kalkbrenner in there as the other
I
guy.
thought you might say him.
Yeah. He's another guy who I think will probably be available in that range somewhere. Over his 5 years at Creighton, he was a big-time rim protector. I believe he won three Defensive Players of the Years in the Big East. Block shots, can finish plays. Pretty simple role. It's not really much else he's giving you beyond that. He can step out a little bit and shoot the three. I don't think you would bank on that in the same way you would from a Reyno or some other guys in the league who stretch the floor. But he's somebody who has a backup five and giving you more minutes of rim protection and kind of solidifying the defense as a whole. I think that he could be a great option for this Pistons team too.
I love it. Those are definitely some names I've had a brief look at, and I'm going to dive into a little more for sure. Before we move off the 2025 draft, just some more general stuff, not Pistons related. Who is who is your favorite player in this class? Like just a player that the style of player you like. Like, is there anyone that stands out? And then second, who would be your biggest sleeper, or who are you higher on than the consensus?
Yeah, so I would probably say my favorite player in this class is Dylan Harper, and I know he's going in all likelihood he's going number 2, so that's kind of a mainstream pick, but I really do like the way that he controls the game. He's able to get to the bucket. Big guards with size and the ability to make plays in a lot of different ways and potentially create shots from all over the floor. That's kind of my favorite type of player. So he would probably be my favorite guy to watch. I would say, in terms of sleepers, it is always hard to kind of get a gauge there because, you never know when guys are going to rise. Even somebody like Cedric Howard, who, if you asked me this question 4 weeks ago, I probably would have said him as somebody who was a sleeper, and now he might go in the lottery. He might go top 10, for all we know. But I would say at this point in time, somebody like Javon Small from West Virginia would probably be my sleeper. He's a smaller guard, but I think that the way that he's able to impact the game in multiple ways, you watch him in West Virginia this year, carrying that team with Tucker DeVries going down. His ability to, shoot the pull-up three, make plays, defend, better athlete than, you might expect as well. He's somebody who I think could be a sleeper pick as a contributor guard who right now on mocks you might find somewhere in the late 40s into, maybe the undrafted range. So he would be probably my sleeper pick right now.
I love it. Well, I was actually going to ask you because we're going to move on and talk about the Pistons core now, but were you at OK State when Cade was there?
I was, year. I was there, yeah.
I'm guessing if Dylan Harper's a player you like, Cade's definitely up there with some of your favorite players to scout. So we may as well talk about Cade then. I'm going to go through just the past few lottery picks the Pistons have had, but let's start with Cade. I just want to get your thoughts, firstly on his season just gone, but more so has he played out his career to date how you expected? Is he further along than maybe you thought? Just going all the way back to when you scouted him in 2021.
Yeah, I think that he had a little bit rockier early start to his career than I would have expected, just in terms of efficiency and really kind of, obviously he had the injury in there too that threw some things off. I think his career goes a little bit differently if he doesn't have that, but a little bit slower than maybe I would have anticipated at first. But he's fully become the guy that I expected this past year, especially as they were able to put the proper pieces around him right as he was starting to ascend as a player too. So I think just the way that he's able to control the game in all facets, get the spots on the floor, also defend. I think he's, been a little bit underrated in that aspect, just on a game-by-game basis. But just his all-around impact has been excellent. He's an all-star. I think that he has a couple notches still left to go as well. So he's definitely right on pace and right on time. And I think that as he if he can continue to get, more efficient, find his spots on the floor, cut down on some of those turnovers that he, still has issues with from time to time, he's gonna get to that next level and carry this team even further.
For sure. And I don't know if you can recall, but one of the things I think Pistons fans, fans aren't frustrated with Cade per such with this, but he's kind of struggled to get to the line with consistency. Was that, I didn't watch much of his college season at all, but was that something that he struggled with in college, or is the officiating a bit different, so it's not something that transfers? Yeah, was that something you noticed when scouting him at all or watching him?
I can't remember 100%. I don't remember him being super high in terms of free throw rate. I think he was probably just average. It has been interesting though in the NBA. I think the thing that I will say though in college that was there, he's never been like a high rim pressure guy in terms of like just being able to blow past people and get to the bucket. So that's part of the reason I think the free throw rate has been a little bit lower in the league. But there also are times I watch him where I think the officiating, like for him specifically, for somebody as big as him, he should be getting a few more calls than he does get. I don't know if that's going to come next year with the reputation or whatever the case is, but yeah, I think that that's something that he is going to have to figure out and experiment with, and also hopefully he gets like the benefit of the doubt a little bit more than he has to this point.
No, I agree. I think the last part, like him getting more respect, will definitely come after a season like this. But as well, I feel like because of his size and because I tend to think sometimes because he isn't like this high flyer on drives, like it's a lot more slower. When he like gets contact, it's not as like exaggerated as someone who's moving at a more high pace or that kind of thing. So, but it has been strange, but I think it's something that will come. Moving on to the 2022 draftees in Ivey and JD, or Jalen Duren, I should say. Just thoughts on those two thus far.
Yeah, I loved that draft at the time. I think I had they were both in my top five. So being able to get Jalen Duren, in that spot was a home run in my opinion. He's also somebody who had some ups and downs in the last couple years, but he started to really make things work in a major way as of late. And I think he's got the chance to really nail that home next season. But hopefully Jaden Ivey is able to come back healthy and kind of pick up where he left off as well. That was one of those unfortunate injuries, just the way that it happened, and you get rolled up under, and now you're out for the season. But I think that like getting him back in that mix because of what he brings to the table and like his energy, his athleticism, being able to get downhill. He's a much different player than somebody like Cade, and how he's more methodical, gets to his spots. Ivey can kind of draw attention in a different way, and I think that their combination has always been something that really intrigued me if they can put it together as a collective. Again, that injury really hurts because that's some valuable time for them to be on the court together. But yeah, I think like hopefully he's able to come back, continue taking strides as a shooter, both off the catch and as a pull-up guy. He's made some major improvements there from his freshman season at Purdue to his sophomore season to get into the league. I think that he's made some sizable improvements there. And yeah, I think the two of them have been have at least put themselves in position to be core pieces of this team for a long time. And I think that, getting guys like the veterans that they did this year was really big for Duren, specifically on the defensive end, just trying to get him back into a space where he can, put those tools to actual use instead of, some of the like, you start questioning like what he's doing out there at times. But yeah, I think they're in a great spot for them for what I've seen.
No, I agree. They're both. It's the injuries with these Pistons young guys have been weird. Like Cade missed pretty much all of his second season. Ji misses half of his third. Ausar, who we'll talk about in a sec, missed like a quarter of his rookie season, but then the whole off season, the start of this season. So it's been hard to get them to play all together. But speaking of, I'm going to group Ausar and Ron Holland here together just to get your thoughts. Both pick fives in back-to-back drafts, 23 and 2024. I think a lot of fans will say Ausar has the highest ceiling, but also a lot of fans are in love with the way Ron Holland. So it seems to fit like that Pistons mold of just like a dog, like doesn't give up. So just your thoughts on those two, maybe pre-draft, and then what you've seen out of each of them.
Yeah, I like both of these picks, especially with the cards that the Pistons were dealt with the fifth pick. I think there was some questions at the time, especially on the Ron Holland pick about another non-shooter, somebody that couldn't space the floor. But I think getting that talent and getting that athleticism, you've got great skills on defense, the ability to for Ron being able to pressure the rim, especially in transition. He's already very good at that. Has the potential to do more attacking closeouts as that shot gets there and those things. And then also Ausar's ability to make plays. And I really like him defensively. I think that he is one of the better wing defenders in the league when he's healthy. I think there was a lot of talk about Amin Thompson and how good he was this year. I think Ausar can be better, for as crazy as that sounds. I think that he when they're both out there firing, I think Ausar is better defensively. But yeah, I think that they, the shot is going to have to get there for at least one of them for them to I think work as a team, and get to that next step. Unless, the structure of that team, if you have a Reno or somebody at the 5 that can space the floor, it can get a little bit trickier, down the line. But I think that what both of them bring to the table is something that every team wants, from the wing defense and being able to make plays and the athleticism and Ron Holland, what he was able to do in the G League that year and being able to be a downhill threat at all times. I think that he's got the potential to continue ascending in a major way too, given how young he is. So yeah, I mean, it is going to depend on how everything else happens with his roster, but I think they've got a ton of potential.
Yeah, I like how you bring up the transition finishing for Ron, because I'm not sure if he was as good as he was in the G League as he was a rookie, but I honestly, him in transition was like an automatic 2 points.
Yeah.
He would make the craziest finishes in transition that he wouldn't be able to make in the half court. They just go in. It was just that after watching all his games, I was like, this guy does not miss in transition.
Yeah,
And I was surprised by that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, you mentioned just the dog. That's the other element that he brings. It's especially last year's draft, just how weird it was. You kind of want to value who plays hard and who plays the hardest. He obviously brings that to the table. He's obviously not afraid to mix it up with whoever, whenever. Might need to just reel it in just a little bit, but you love it, and especially just embodying the personality of the city of Detroit. And he's already a fan favorite. If he can continue to hitting on the things that he's good at and knock down a few more shots, play a little bit more in control in certain moments, he's going to be a great player for them for a long time.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with your point. If there is a future where Ron and Ausar are starting on the Pistons and they're being extended, one of them's going to have to be a shooter. But that's probably still another 12 to 18 months away, that question. But from memory, I don't know if you can remember, but I think did you have Ron as your number 1 or 2 player on your final big board last year?
Yeah, he was my number 2. That's yeah.
Right. And then I can't remember back to 2023. Where was Ausar in the end? Because I remember when he was at pick 5, a lot of fans thought it wasn't a reach, but I feel like he was more in that 7 or 8 area. But I can't recall for yourself where you had him.
Yeah, he was at number 6 for me, I believe. Yeah, so he was very much in that range for them. The Ron Holland at 2 was depending on where you were looking. He was a little more controversial to have that opinion, but it was a very weird year. You defined a range of opinions on a lot of guys. Yeah.
No, it's that whole year we were pushing Alex Sarr number 1 at the NBL. But as someone who watches scouting and stuff, I knew how even it was across the board for that number 1 pick. But the next thing I was going to ask you about before we get some rapid fire questions to wrap it up was about the Cade and Ivey pairing, and you kind of answered that. So I guess I'll rephrase this. There's a lot of discussion in the Pistons community at the moment about trading for whether it's Kevin Durant or some sort of star, and essentially you'd be bringing in this more of an older star, but Ivey's probably the name that's a part of a lot of those deals. Do you think it's too early to give up on this this backcourt, or where are you? Because some
Yeah.
fans are like, oh, well, we just made the playoffs, took the Knicks to 6. Look how far the Knicks went. So maybe it's time to make a move. So, yeah, just your overall thoughts on that kind of topic.
Yeah, I think they're in an interesting spot where you have the opportunity to be able to cash in and get upgrade the roster or get a star in some capacity. I'm not 100% sure I would go that direction. I think that they have a lot to work with, and you overachieved so much this season. I think pushing the Knicks to the point that they did, and obviously the Knicks had a very good chance of making the finals. If things go a little bit different way, if Tyrese Halliburton doesn't make that one shot, who knows what happens in that series. But I would still be a little bit more patient and have some internal development, at least for this next season. I think that's when you make the decisions, when you have the contract stuff, on the table and those types of things to address a little bit more. For specifically Ivey, though, I'm not 100% sure that I would have their duo in mind. I like him a lot. It's just like depending on the offer that might be out there, if for some reason Devin Booker was available, you kind of have to consider those things as much as you like the potential of Ivey, or something like that. And especially Booker, because he is still in his late 20s. Some of these other guys that have been floated out there and they're 32 to 35 plus, like I would be a lot less hesitant on that, especially because you're probably giving up an Ausar or a Ron Holland in that as well. But yeah, I would be a little bit more patient, hopefully be able to make something happen through the draft and kind of reassess as you see what you can do this next season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think, like, I can see why fans, particularly this point of the season when there's not a lot going on with the team, like it's fun to, draft up trades and you want to be a part of all these rumors. But I think it's just run it back in the sense with the young core. I'm not too eager to move on because we haven't seen enough of Cade and Ivey yet. As weird as it is to say, with Cade going into, wow, it'll be year 5 for him. That's insane. And then Ivey year 4. So I can't believe it's gone that quick, but they still haven't got that much time. But we're going to wrap it up here with just some rapid fire questions. I got a couple here from Tom Herr, who's a Korean Pistons fan. Shout out. He has 2 questions here for you. Has any prospect/player approached you regarding your analysis? Have any of them requested you to make a video about them, or just had any feedback in general? You don't have to name the player if you don't want, but just, what have those interactions been like?
Yeah, I haven't had too much direct interaction on that in that aspect, especially for asking to do a video or anything like that. I've interacted a little bit more on the agent team side of things for whatever reason. But yeah, that's probably what I would say on that. I would say earlier on there was a little more interaction. Like Desmond Bain, he liked one of the video I did on him, but that was about it. I'm trying to think. There was something else I was going to say on that, but yeah, not too much.
Got you. And then he also asked, does your view count on your prospects analysis rise when there are bigger markets in the lottery?
Yeah, definitely. I think whenever the Lakers are involved in any way, that video is gonna go crazy. So if they were to pick, I don't know, somehow pick somebody, Danny Wolf or something. Like if I did a Danny Wolf video and he was picked, you could be picked 45th. That's gonna do as many numbers as maybe somebody who was picked 5th or something, depending on the team.
It's insane.
So sometimes the Knicks, it is a lot of markets, and then also depending on where they're from, there might be a big international base like Hanson Young. There's been some players in the past who have had big time international fan bases, like Kai Soto is another guy who had a huge following. So it fluctuates depending on who it is. Yeah.
Do you normally see, so like, you know how you'll do the individual player breakdowns in the lead up to the draft? Do all of those get a spike in like the next few days after the draft
Yeah.
because everyone's going to find their guy?
Yeah, draft night especially, it goes pretty crazy. The first
Yeah.
year when I was, because we had COVID and I had basically 12 months to put together everybody's scatter report. I did like 66 reports or something. Najee Marshall to Devon Dotson, I did everybody. That day it was crazy. Like everybody had somebody, even the guys who didn't get drafted, there was videos. So that was the craziest. But yeah, draft night, lottery night, those are the big ones.
Yeah, I could imagine. It's like I said, I feel like back in 2020, especially, like you were one of the only ones doing these full breakdowns, especially with like players outside of like the lottery. So like I can imagine that was just going crazy. So the next question I had was, one, those draft analysis, like the player profiles, how long do they take, and how long does it take you to do that big board to do one of those videos?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot, and I never have a real answer. I've always wanted to sit down and like time myself and everything because it happens kind of over the course of the year, like putting together like I'll scout a complete game, put the clips together, and I have that video of like, um, let's say Cade versus KU or something,
Yeah.
January 1st, and then like put that into things and cut that up. So I'm not 100% sure. I think from like start to finish, at least in like March or April or whatever, probably takes a couple days, like 2-3 days, working probably like 12 plus hours a day. So something around there. And then on the big boards, it's a lot more efficient later on because I can use clips that I've already put in there, and I'm not updating them. Like throughout the year, I'll update the clips and highlights and everything. But those can definitely take like 5 days
Yeah.
to put together completely. Just from all the pieces that goes, like the graphics and all that. So yeah, those can take a little minute.
Yeah, because as someone, like, I don't edit videos like as long as yours, but I do a lot of short form, and I know how long some of those take. And it's just like, man, I watch your stuff and I'm like, okay, so I reckon he's made loads in Photoshop, exported all of them across. I don't know if you use Premiere or whatever, but I'm just like, that's the first thing that comes to me when I'm watching your videos. I'm like, how long does this take? But so yeah, I definitely appreciate the grind it would take you to make those. I've always been interested. Two more quick ones and then we'll wrap it up. Biggest draft hit so far? Was there a player in the 5 or 6 draft cycles you've done that you were like, yeah, I was right about him? I'm not right about him, but he's just panned out unexpectedly better than maybe a lot of other people might have thought.
I would say that first year, Desmond Bain, Tyrese Maxey, Jaden McDaniels, they were all in the top 20 of my board. Maxey was in the lottery and everything. I would say those were relative hits based off of where they went. If you look at draft Twitter, ask people at the time, we were all kind of higher on them than they ended up. So I would throw them out there. I would also say Jalen Johnson. He's another guy who I thought should have went in the lottery. There was a lot of other noise about him at the time. He ends up going 20th. Had a really good season this year, so he would definitely be in there as well. And then I would say, I wouldn't say he's like necessarily biggest hit, but around the midpoint that year, I started saying like Paulo was number 1 in that class. And even up to draft night, like people still thought that he was going 3rd. So I definitely liked that year just because I'd been on like kind of nailing that home, and then he ends up going number 1 at the last minute. So some of those are the ones I remember most.
Yeah, the name that stood out to me there was Jaden McDaniel, because I remember specifically watching your video on him, and I feel like, did he come into Washington as more of like a score first guy?
Yeah.
Like he wasn't KD, like, but like he was meant to come in and be like a score first guy. And then I remember I was like, I hope the Pistons, like, obviously he was out of the range at the time if we had pick 7, but I was like, if they get another pick, like that's a guy I'd really like. And then to see him turn into this defensive stud like 3 and D. That's a player I always think of when I think of that class.
Yeah, he was definitely more in that. He would get the KD comparisons.
Yeah.
He was, Brandon Ingram, those types of
Yeah.
guys. And even at Washington, they play zone. So he was playing zone that entire year and didn't really get to show everything that he had defensively. But, he found a role in Minnesota and was able to, really become a really high impact player. So, yeah.
No, I've loved his game, watching him develop. Finally, biggest draft miss. But maybe this can be more phrased as like, is there a player that you're just like, man, I thought they don't have to be like you're not going to be a star. You're like, I thought he was definitely going to be a starter, or they just have not panned out like you thought.
Yeah, I always remember the misses way more than anything that I get right. It always sticks more in my head. So there's a lot of players that I think I've learned a lot of lessons from. The first one I would say is Sharif Cooper. I was fairly high on him. Definitely not a little too, way too high on him, considering he's not in the league right now. But I think you look at him as a very small guard who was a questionable shooter, questionable defender at best, and was very ball dominant, didn't really provide anything off the ball. And you obviously see him fall in the draft for those reasons and not able to really find a rotation spot or home in the NBA for those reasons as well. So he's definitely somebody who I learned a lot from, having as high as I did. I think I had him like 12 or something like that. Walker Kessler is another one who I was too low on, and his thing was kind of the opposite because it allowed me to, value rim protection a little bit more than I had previously, and what he was able to do and bring to the table. And obviously he's a big time contributor in Utah now. And so like going into the Donovan Klingons after that, and some other bigs who may not have the most obvious offensive value or don't space the floor or anything beyond catching lobs and finishing plays, they still have a way to contribute in the block rates and stuff that he was putting up at Auburn, where made him an obvious prospect. But yeah, so those would be some of the main ones that come to mind. Yeah. There's some others I think about often for other reasons, but yeah, those two.
No, that's really interesting. I was wondering if you're going to say a guy for me. This goes back to that 2020 class again. Patrick Williams. I thought he was like, I remember we all wanted him to slide to 7. I think he went 4 or 5 to the Bulls. Mm-hmm. I just can't believe where his career's gone so far. Maybe some of his injury, but that was a name for me.
Yeah, he's somebody who, I at least felt like he'd have a little bit more upward mobility than he has to this point. He's kind of stagnated in some ways. Still has like a chance to be a really solid player. Yeah. And he's decent still, but you hope a little more came out of what he's become. Yeah.
Well, look, man, that's going to do it. I did just remember one funny thing while we're talking, and it was from your 2021 draft cycle, the Josh Giddey weaknesses. You know what I'm talking about? The freeze frame of his weaknesses. Yeah. I remember seeing that thing go viral.
Man. That was crazy. Yeah, well, that's another thing that I learned from. I obviously changed up the videos and how they go for that reason specifically, because if you watch the video, it was never as drastic. It was just too broad. There was too many labels, so it made it seem like it was like an attack on him. When in reality, if somebody wanted to, you could have taken that from another player and done that same thing. But yeah, definitely. I mean, I hate that still lives on today in some capacity, because I still thought that he was. I had him like ranked 10th or something, but
yeah, Well, that's what I was going to say. Like me watching the video, I thought nothing of it. You watch the video, you think nothing of it, but I feel like it took like a year maybe, and then it popped up out of nowhere, or I don't know. I just remember seeing that thing of, I'm like, hang on, that's Hoop Intellect? I remember
Yeah.
watching that, and I didn't think anything of it, but I just remember seeing that thing go crazy, and it's just one of the typical like social media these days. You don't have the context, and it just gets ran with. But sorry to bring that up at the end, but I just remember OJ. But that's gonna do it for today's show. Tell the people where they can find you. Obviously, they'll know we are on YouTube, but everything you got coming up, I know you're very busy at the moment, but just, yeah, tell people they can follow in all your work.
Yeah, you can follow me on YouTube, Hoop Intellect. Got a lot more scouting reports coming out from now in the draft. Definitely a final big board in there, maybe another mock. Follow me on Twitter. I haven't been posting as much lately, but probably post a few things before the draft and everything, live tweeting the finals and all that type of stuff. And yeah, Instagram, Hoop Intellect as well. That's where you can find all the stuff that I put out.
I love it, man. We'll have all those links in the description, anything, you'll be tagged in it. So please go support Hoop Intellect. It's incredible. I've loved following your journey, man. And thank you so much for joining. That's going to do it for today's show, guys. If you could please like, subscribe, drop a comment below. It all helps. But as always, go Pistons.